Welcome to Memorable Marketing by MediaGroup. Today's guest is Liz Fendt. Liz has a wealth of experience working in marketing roles. She's done so mostly with TÜV SÜD, which is a German institute for certification and training and so on. And the work that she does is very interesting, both from a B2B and a B2C perspective. Hopefully we can get to talk a little bit about their strategy and how they bring across their expertise to a pretty wide target audience. So here it is. Enjoy the conversation.
It's all about who you have in your team. Ultimately, the customer needs to understand that we're the right people to work with for this particular service. And then we want to ideally have that customer transact, whether that's online or speak to a salesperson.
All right. Very special, memorable marketing by MediaGroup. We have on the podcast Liz Fendt. Is that how I pronounce your name, by the way?
That is correct. It's a very easy German name. I was actually born Liesel Elisabeth Schulten, which would have been much harder to say. But during my time of being out and about internationally, I sort of arrived at this name. So I shortened my first name, I switched my first name for my second name, and then I changed my surname. So all in all, it's almost like a brand name, and I like it. It's easy to pronounce.
Yeah. I was wondering about that. Obviously I'm Dutch, so it's quite easy for me to pronounce German stuff, but you would think something like Schlachtem, it's again, thanks a lot for joining us. Today we'll have a conversation a bit about your background, but also some of the very interesting companies that you work with for and what you've done there. So let's dive right into it. I think maybe you can give us an introduction about your background, and we can take it from there.
Okay, fantastic. Right, I'll try and keep a long story short. So I was born to a German father, British mother. I had the majority of my schooling education in the UK. I then moved to Berlin, which was an amazing place to move to then study. And after finishing my studies of business and economics in Berlin, I then moved to Cologne and worked for Agfa, which now, perhaps, if you mention the word Agfa, not many people know about it. It was one of the giant photographic companies alongside Fuji and Kodak. I had an amazing experience there in the fact that there were very few native speakers. So I joined the marketing organization, built up marketing internationally. And then they reached out to me and asked me whether or not I would like to take the public relations position, which basically meant me going out and building the brand globally. And that was a fascinating time. I had a good 5 years of experience there. I then applied for a position with the current company, which is TÜV SÜD, because again, they were looking for somebody to take their company global. At that point in time, the company was very much a German headquartered company with a few small pockets of activity outside of the German headquarters, but that was more or less it. So after about 2 years in Germany, I was sent out to Asia to build the business out there. And I had an amazing 15 years effectively, working in Taiwan, worked in Hong Kong, worked in Singapore. And during that time, we acquired 32 companies and went on this whole sort of M&A acquisition piece, which meant, of course, a lot of integration. And that was a very exciting time. And then sort of after about 2 to 3 years, started building up the marketing function, first up in Asia Pacific. And then I was asked to take that remit global. So I've really been responsible, I would say, to take the company global alongside many other talented individuals, and then more specifically focus and hone in on marketing. So after building the marketing function globally, we then, I'd say in the last 5 to 6 years, been on a very, very concerted digitalization path. And before I sort of come to the end of that, I think it's perhaps interesting to mention that I was given a sabbatical year. I was lucky enough to get it. I thought I'm just going to ask and see what happens. So the CEO said, yeah, that's fine, but you need to leave within 6 weeks. So I was like, oh, great, panic stations. I then built a plan, went around the world by myself. And then as part of that deal, I worked in India, supporting women to build a set of skills that they previously didn't have. And that, I think, led me to another strand to my life, which has really been about mentoring, supporting advocating for women. And I've subsequently built the women's network within the company. And there's about 1,200 women in that network alongside 2 other talented ladies. And I continue to really support and advocate for women as sort of part of my giving back.
And so from what I hear from your story, a lot of it is about sort of international, having that international view, and then sort of centralizing everything into to hubs, together with giving back, as you said. The centralizing into hubs is particularly interesting. A lot of clients struggle, or a lot of brands struggle with this process, because on the one hand, they want to be very localized and they want to be relevant. On the other hand, they want to have the efficiencies of centralizing everything. How have you dealt with that sort of back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think it's a question that every single person in my current position asks themselves, how to get that right. It's how to find the sweet spot between, as you mentioned, centralization, but also delivering on what the local markets want in terms of value. And I would say, honestly, you're never going to be finished with an organizational format. It really depends, of course, on the external factors and also the internal factors and how it works out. And I have no issue in amending, adapting, changing, and transforming the organization. It might not be a wholesale organizational change, but tinkering with bits that aren't necessarily working. But to answer your question, currently we are in a position where we have what I define to be a hub and spoke marketing organization, the hub being the global marketing team. And I think the danger to some sort of centralization is always that you end up in at least a perceived ivory tower where you have no real understanding of the market. And I was very aware of that being outside of headquarters for so many years. So I left effectively half of the global marketing team based out of Singapore. The other half is based out of the headquarters, Munich. And I think that gives a really good feel to the fact that we're not all based in one effective ivory tower doing what we do globally. Then we've built 6 regional hubs, and each of those regional hubs represents a number of markets. So, for example, the regional hub of Western Europe represents about 8 or 9 markets. Some of those are larger, some of those are smaller. And the people still sit in those countries, but there is a regional organizational form around it. And then it makes life honestly easier because we have single points of contact into each of the regions, and they are then able to collectively support in terms of understanding what the region needs, playing that into us, and then we have conversations with those regional leads, and that makes a lot of sense. So what we have is a global hub, about 40 of us, then I'd say about 160 based in these 6 regional hubs.
So do I see it correctly when I say that there's some sort of boundaries that you set globally, as well as the workflows and the systems? Within that, you let the spokes sort of independent?
Yeah, I'd say so. What we do centrally is a few things. Number one, we are responsible for the marketing technology. And that makes a lot of sense because if you can imagine, we have about 40 countries, right? Imagine every single one of those countries has their own platforms that they operate. I mean, A, it's just not cost effective, and B, there's no synergy between anything that we do. So we went concertedly in and said, okay, we're going to select and identify a MarTech vision, strategy, and a platform, pathway. And that together with the countries is something that we would agree to do. So for example, we have one content management system for the website. We have one marketing automation system, et cetera, et cetera. So we provide those central platforms. We also take the costs of those central platforms, and then we work together with the regions to identify areas for improvement because, again, that stuff's never done. So we do the iterations and the enhancements and the innovation of those platforms centrally based on the feedback that we're receiving from the markets. Number 2, we're responsible to develop central content. And that central content is primarily top of funnel, middle of funnel. So for example, as a company, we're moving towards talking a lot about sustainability, a lot about digital transformation, and that kind of central content, the brand type content, if you like, that's developed in our team centrally. And then we say to the regions, you can add on to that and add your local flavor, but at least you have a good baseline of content. The field marketing teams in the regions then basically add on to that content and work to deliver on field marketing campaigns with more, let's say, lower funnel type of content that really push local services, if you like. But we do some of that stuff as well. And what we identify is, okay, let's say, for example, we provide a service across 6 countries. We would then say, listen, it makes more sense for us to develop, for example, a white paper or a webinar, and then we provide that to the countries. They then take it and campaign it. So those are 2 examples. And then, of course, we have central processes governing, the interoperability of various subsystems. For example, the marketing and sales handshake. We've developed a globally aligned lead management framework so that everybody is scoring in the same way. Everybody basically follows the same process and system. But, when it comes to the marketing locally of local services, that's done by the regional teams.
It's very interesting that you have sort of codified this top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel, and have aligned that with the hub and spoke model. In that it actually, when you think about it, makes a lot of sense that global would do top of funnel. It's about the brand, it's about setting the tone, and local markets probably have the most difference in bottom of funnel preferences in what works in terms of sales messages and so on, right?
Absolutely. And the channels, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. For example, the general assumption over here in Europe or in Asia is that everybody uses LinkedIn. They don't. I mean, you go to China and they just don't use LinkedIn. They can't use LinkedIn. It's not relevant to them at all. We obviously, as much as I'd like to say that we would love to adopt their WeChat practices, which are amazing, it doesn't work for us in other markets. And I remember distinctly when we implemented white papers, I had to first of all describe to our colleagues in China what a white paper was, and they just couldn't understand that. And why would anybody want to read such a voluminous piece when ultimately China was going all video? I mean, it's short form video content that works best in those Asian markets. But what I generally tend to see is there are early adopters of technology and of types of content, and there are those markets that are perhaps slower to adopt. But there's generally a trend where I'm at least seeing that, in Asia, some Asian countries and America, there's much higher acceleration of adoption of digital and types of content. And then that slowly trickles through to some of the other markets. So, it might be useful to them, but maybe not now. So we kind of have to find the sweet spot between the channels that work, the content that works across a large, common denominator of markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us to a very interesting point. I mean, having lived in these various markets, being sort of Western and moving to Asia like I have, you see the difference in how people work, but also what works and what doesn't. Do you see? Is there anything sort of global that you can say about the differences between East and West in terms of target audience, in terms of also the people that you work with and so on? Is there some
similarity? I'll start with similarities, not to answer your question. But what I am seeing in terms of similarities is the convergence of B2B and B2C. I mean, I used to hear for years that, oh my goodness, we're B2B, therefore we need to be more technical, we need to have greater depth of content on our websites. I mean, ultimately, with people all using the same technology when they're outside of the workspace, they're then getting very used to the way that they experience customer interaction when they purchase items for their private life. And therefore, they want the same behaviors to be able to be implemented across their business life. So just because you happen to be primarily an organization that sells to B2B, it doesn't necessarily mean that customers want to see differences in the way they're marketed to. So I think that's actually quite interesting in the convergence of the way we, develop and implement content and the way we bring customers along the customer journey. For example, I'd say about 10, 15 years ago, we had far more content absolutely everywhere. Straight up, you go onto the website and you'd be overwhelmed with the amount of content that you get because we're a company that prides itself on technical prowess and engineering expertise. So, we used to want to say, okay, we can do all of this and, read everything up on the website. And now we're saying, we need to reduce that. Ultimately, the customer, needs to understand that we're the right people to work with for this particular, service. And then we want to ideally have that customer transact, whether that's online or speak to a salesperson. So, we're removing and reducing content. And that's probably applicable across all marketing channels across the world. So as I mentioned, there's early adopters, for example, in Asia, where they've moved, I'd say, much faster towards higher amount of video content, lower amount of written, lengthy content. But I'm actually seeing more of a convergence across the world than ever before with those kind of things.
So if you're saying this the scarcity of attention that everyone is seeing in the B2C market, and that is and people are expecting to be marketed to in the same way, that carries over, and perhaps, like you were pointing out, China has the right idea there with short, digestible content.
I mean, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and somebody from TikTok was there, and they're making the sales pitch effectively to marketeers such as myself, saying, TikTok is a channel for you. And this is sort of general assumption that no, it's not, because it's, primarily targeting, I don't know, teenagers doing, fun dance type of videos. And again, there's a convergence happening there. I think that's changing, that's moving. There's nothing that stays effectively set in stone. And when we look at targeting our services to the younger generation, they're not going to be willing to sit down and read a trade publication. It's very unlikely they would do so. It's actually quite unlikely that anybody of my generation would probably sit down and read cover to cover a trade publication. And that used to be where we really put our marketing focus and emphasis. It'd be really important for us to have, us placed in the key trade publications across the various industry segments. Now we're looking at shorter form content, interactive content, and we're putting a far greater emphasis on social media channels, and we're looking at TikTok. And, as a rather, esteemed, more traditional company, that seems, absurd almost that we would, TikTok, and we've tried it. We did an MVP with one of our business areas, and it just took off like wildfire. So I don't think that there's anything that's traditional anymore that's suitable for one type of company or another. I'm seeing more convergence and less differences across the globe.
What's next? You're launching a cryptocurrency, going into the metaverse?
Well, what we are doing is we're checking every single service to see whether or not it's viable to be sold online. It's fascinating. We've taken quite a number of our services and built shops. We're moving our customers through those shops, and that would have been something we would have never considered 10 years ago. Now we have an entire e-business section of our business looking at what we can bring online and how we can bring the customers online.
Sure. And I think the point that you're making about your customer being your customer, no matter where they are, it could be the same person on Facebook or on TikTok that used to read those publications. And I think the reason, now that I think about it, the reason why some of these trade publications are getting less and less relevant is because there used to be a scarcity of information within certain niches. Like, it would be very interesting. I used to work in online trading in Denmark, and it used to be very, very interesting to read industry gossip, to go to conferences and meet the same faces over and over again, because you really couldn't get this type of information interaction otherwise. But now those people are connected on LinkedIn, we're connected on Facebook, on IG or whatever, and we can get that information in other ways. And so now you have the opposite problem with an information overload.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also if you think about the speed of communication, I remember distinctly how long it took us and how many approval loops to just get one article placed in a trade publication. Now we are, training a whole mini army, so to speak, of corporate ambassadors to then represent our interests on LinkedIn. They're the experts. They're the best placed people in order to represent our company in an authentic, genuine manner. So, we are working with them, alongside them, so that we can build their confidence to get themselves out on LinkedIn. And they then are effectively empowered to publish their own content. And you can imagine the plethora and the amount of content being pushed out, as opposed to one person going through this sort of very long, lengthy process to get one article out on a trade publication.
So it seems like your organization has been able to, even though it's a very large organization, to stay a bit nimble, or to become a bit nimble again in terms of the marketing operations. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I think what I wanted to share with you today was the fact that it's all about who you have in your team. I think if I was going to tell you one thing that I think is the most important thing to me has got to be talent. I think we've got to make sure that talent stays fresh within the marketing organization, that you have a really good balance of those who've been around for a long time, such as myself, and refreshed with skills, with outlook, with viewpoints that are coming in from agencies, from other companies. And of course, having that wonderful diversity across the marketing organization of, everything, age, gender, race, pretty much everything. And I think that helps a lot to keep things fresh. So, we've built in the last 2 to 3 years a performance marketing team. And what they effectively do is they have single discipline people coming in on topics like search engine optimization, social media, analytics, paid, just to mention a few. And they then connect into those regional hubs. And we have then power users or specialists in each of those particular marketing disciplines. And that really helps to keep, us fresh. Those people look and see what the trends are. They anticipate what's needed for the future. They then play that into myself, into the other leaders of the marketing organization, so that we make sure that we stay nimble. And I think the worst thing you can do is sort of rest on your laurels and think, right, we fixed it now. And what we do is we change things incrementally. For example, the brand, and we've got a very traditional looking brand. It's very nice. It's blue. It looks very engineering like. And I think what we've really needed to do, we're about to start that, is make it more human, more approachable, more who we are and what we want to be moving forward. And we're not doing that with some sort of orchestrated massive project. Of course, there's a project in the background and it's very well engineered, but it's incremental. We're going out, I think, this or next week on Instagram with the new look and feel. We're testing it. If it doesn't really resonate well, we'll make some changes. You can do loads of stuff that you couldn't do previously, simply because you can more or less chuck things at the wall, see if they work. If not, tweak it. I mean, I think there's no harm and there's no fear in doing that anymore.
Yeah, and that's kind of the promise of the internet, right? Like the old saying about 80% of my marketing doesn't work. I just don't know which 80%. And with the internet, you're able to measure and test incrementally and be very agile. But a lot of organizations have fallen into this trap of committees and making sure that everything falls within very strict brand guidelines and so on. And just wondering if there's any secret to it, but I guess the right people is what you're saying.
I think the right people, and also the management of the stakeholders. So, part of the global marketing team is actually paid by one of the divisions. And I think that's important because they stay invested in the things that we do. And I think it's very important that there's an education process. Not just the marketing team understands what the customers want and we look at all the data, but the CEOs start really understanding what's changing in marketing and what works better. And every interaction we have, and we have frequent interactions with the business, and I think that makes a huge difference. For example, the CEO of each of the divisions, we have 5 divisions, we interact with them. I do together with the expert in my team once a quarter. And those meetings look something like this. We don't plan for a year ahead. We plan for the quarter and have sort of focus topics for the entire year. Then we play back to the CEO, what we've been doing, what the results of those campaigns have been, and what the key learnings are. And I think that's very important to say, this is where we got some great engagement. This is where it didn't go so well, so we're going to try something else. And I think this sort of trial and error and really, concertedly looking at the data and adapting what you do according to the data. My feeling is, as long as you're transparent and you're open about that, it's interesting for the CEOs to be on that journey with you, and it sort of creates that climate of agility and playfulness. And it's also interesting, I think, for the folks in the team. I mean, if I was to hire someone and say you're going to do exactly the same job and you're going to have no, area where you can play, they're going to say, you know what, this is really boring. It's very constraining and I want to go and tinker. We hire people, for example, we've hired a few people in our team in Singapore, and they're straight off the bat from college, and they're fresh from university, and they come around and we always say to them, just, show us what you've got. And let's see what, try it out and let's see how it flies. And, I have no issue going to the C-suite and saying, we're going to try some GIFs instead of, some videos this time and see how that resonates. And I think that's great because it's a journey that we're all on, and it engages and excites the people who perhaps otherwise would think, okay, marketing is just X. And I think that's really brought them into the fold, and that's important as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you're talking a bit about diversity, but also diversity of ideas, of minds, and so on is important. And perhaps also the working together of Western and Asian cultures and different cultures is something that helps there. I think people that are fresh out of university in Singapore are like rocket scientists most of the time, but perhaps not very much used to thinking outside the box, just to generalize a little bit. And then giving them that opportunity, like, here you go and play with it, perhaps works a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've talked here and there about your company and what your strategy is and so on, but perhaps we can synthesize it a bit and you can talk about what, if you would give it a sort of elevator pitch, what is your marketing strategy for this company? Who's your target audience? What products are you selling?
Right. So, in terms of marketing strategy, if you consider the fact that we're in the TIC industry, so testing, inspection, and certification, and our competition consists of similar type of companies across the globe. From a branding perspective, we focus on branding ourselves as a sustainability partner and a digital transformation accelerator. And in doing that marketing-wise, we really focus on developing and pushing out content across various digital channels, and those can be quite different depending on the geography in which we are residing. So, for example, we'll go out with that same content in a different content form in China through WeChat, as we would, for example, in the US. We'll probably push that content out through our website and through a series of email campaigns. And then when it comes to the middle and bottom of funnel marketing campaigns and content, we really focus on webinars, focus on technical and very targeted newsletters, in combination with paid campaigns on social media. So, for example, one campaign could look like this. We go out with a white paper. We then do that as gated content on the website. We then collect the information, and then we reach out to the audience that have downloaded the white paper. We invite them to attend a webinar on the same subject. And once they've attended the webinar, we then hand over those leads to the sales team. So it's really about going through the funnel. If we see interest, then move them through to sort of, we've warmed them up. We engage with them again. We usually put our authentic, genuine experts in front of the audience doing the webinars. And then after that, we hand them over to our sales team.
All right, that makes sense. And if I could just be so free to kind of summarize in one sentence, you're trying to create trust through expertise, and I suppose the content serves to deliver that expertise, and you use advertising channels to push this to a greater audience.
Absolutely. So we've run quite a number of customer surveys, and every single time they play the same information back to us. They choose us as a company because we have the greatest level of technical expertise. So our thread throughout all of our marketing content and campaigns is that technical prowess that we have.
I see. Okay. And you mentioned a bit before about marketing technology and how you use this, also about the lead scoring. Would you mind to go to a little bit more detail on those?
Yeah. So we're in the process of interconnecting various marketing systems. And we're working with a marketing automation platform. We're connecting that to a CRM platform. And in that process, we have identified a global lead management framework, and also have identified how we will score specific interactions in the marketing automation platform, and at which point they will then be handed over to CRM to then be processed by the sales team. So, that also we've allowed, and I think that's important to specify, we've allowed certain amounts of localization according to the behaviors that we're seeing in various markets. So the markets can then score differently from market to market. So we have a framework which is identical across the globe. And then we said, okay, there can be local nuances in how you score the various interactions and behaviors. For example, the example I just mentioned, if you're downloading a white paper, it scores X number. of points. Then if you're then attending the webinar, it's, X plus Y number of points. And at one certain point, we say, okay, this is now identified as a warm lead that we will then hand over through the CRM system to sales.
Right. And then the thing that comes into play is, what is the type of content that signals high intent?
Exactly.
So, for instance, in China, you were mentioning they might not download the white paper. So that's definitely a thing that comes into question. Are you mostly looking at the behavioral aspect of leads, or are you also taking into consideration data about what type of companies they work for, what function they have, where they're from, things like this?
We're looking more at the behavioral data of leads. So if you look we have two types effectively of customers, ones that are moving through the process I just mentioned, and the second ones are the key accounts. So we have approximately 80 key accounts identified in the company. And then for those key accounts, we're now building marketing campaigns that are really, account-based marketing campaigns, specifically targeting those key accounts. And we have a different approach to those. So we're really, looking at LinkedIn campaigns that are specifically targeting, for example, key account number 1, trying not to mention any names. And then, those will then really be followed up by the dedicated key account manager in our organization. I wouldn't necessarily say, though, that one has a priority over the other. I think, both sets of customers are equally important to us. They just require different approaches.
Do you have different teams for those? You mentioned performance teams versus...
Yeah, at the moment, our central global marketing team is taking care of the key accounts that are globally identified, and the regional marketing teams are taking care of the field marketing campaigns that I mentioned that are going through the marketing automation system.
What is your preferred organization in terms of the target audience? Is there a specific profile that you're looking for, or just anyone that wants to become a customer?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. Of course, it depends really on the nature of our business. So, for example, we have an academy business, and we're reaching out to single customers who would attend an academy course. So the type of target audience we're reaching out to there is a mass audience. Of course, we'd like them to return and to attend further courses, and we cross-sell and upsell. Then, for example, in a very different type of business, for example, industry service, we have very few customers. That is then usually a tender business, or we reach out to them, as you say, through these sort of key account management approaches that we have. So I think it's with such a large organization, you can't say we have one type of preferred customer. It depends very much on the type of organization and the type of service that we have. For example, we have a softlines business, and in that business, we take care of several things, testing and inspection. But that, again, is a mass audience we're reaching out to. And if we would do that, we would reach out through paid campaigns, email campaigns. If you're reaching out to specific customers, for example, on a power plant inspection, you know who they are. There's a very specific group of customers. We do that as well. We would probably want to do more face-to-face interaction, substantiated by webinars, reaching out to that specific group of people. And maybe it's also important to say, we've been talking a lot about online. We do still see the benefits of the good old trade fair, conference, event. And what's also quite interesting to observe from a marketing standpoint is we've had this, of course, this sort of move to online. And now we're seeing a resurgence, effectively, of offline really being quite an important component in order to re-establish the relationships with key clients. So, for example, in the UK, the events conference circuit has sort of been resuscitated, and we're back on board. And what I envisage will happen, the line will flatten out slowly again. And I imagine we're probably looking at a 70% online, 30% offline. But these things need to tie very closely into one another.
Yeah. I mean, also use online to promote offline participation, how it works together. I suppose also the other way around. In a lot of B2B industries, and I suppose it really depends on the product that you're working on, but in a lot of B2B industries, the buyers all know all the sellers. And so these conferences kind of just become a way to schedule sales meetings. And perhaps not a lot of new audiences are driven to those. And in that case, you're doing more collateral support, I suppose, as a marketing function rather than bringing in front of a new audience?
I would say yes and no. If you're going to interview our CEO for North Asia, if he was sitting in front of you now, he'd say that's probably actually less about the collaterals. It's more about building the image of the brand that we are playing in this specific industry circuit. And number two, it's about establishing and building rapport and building relationship with clients. I think you yourself have been in Asia for quite a long time. You know how important it is that the relationship is the core component of any business transaction. And, I've been in meetings where no business has been discussed because that's not.
Those are the best meetings. Yeah.
And that's not part of it, but that happens afterwards. And I mean, the Canton Trade Fair still has a place in this world, and we have large, C-suite business level conferences that we do take part in. We don't just do, let's say, the trade fair booth, but we have speaker slots. We're on panels. It's about us being part of an industry and having something important to contribute. And that's where we really ensure, alongside the social media contribution by the experts, that we position our experts on key panels, talking about things that really matter to our customers. And of course, we can propagate that. You can repurpose that content. If somebody's on a panel talking about topic X, they can then go out and push that information out on LinkedIn. And, we can multi-purpose use the content. So it's not wasted effort. And I think it's actually really important that we don't disregard offline.
Yeah, for sure. I think the point that you're making about content is quite interesting. I mean, we make so much content, a lot of organizations do, but people's attentions are limited, and people that work for companies often overestimate how much attention people are having to their content, and so reusing the content that you do produce in various ways is much more effective than a lot of people would think. If you have a conference appearance and you have someone do a talk, why not take that video and put it up on LinkedIn or whatever?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for example, you could use the same piece of content repurposed for a webinar, a white paper, a newsletter, a speaker slot, and a LinkedIn post. I'm not saying that we do that all the time, but it's something you can definitely look at. And for example, if we do research, a few years ago, we did some research into, how much people are willing to pay as a premium for a product that has a TÜV SÜD certification mark on it. The content that we derived from that was really interesting statistics and data that you can then repurpose. And it also has a longer shelf life than just, a one-time push through LinkedIn, for example.
Yeah, that actually brings me to an interesting point to discuss, is that what is sort of the approach in marketing? Is it get certified and use that as a marketing tool, and you can earn higher margins because of this, or optimize business processes and lower costs and so on through better quality and earn more because of that? So I guess earn more is the key message, but which way you go is a question.
I think the pull factor for somebody to come to us and have their product certified or their process audited has those motivational reasons. And there, of course, is the regulatory compliance aspect. So if I'm a supplier of automotive components based out of Thailand, and I want to pitch my component to BMW, for example, I need to adhere to international standards. So, it's not a question of, do I want to do it? It's, I need to do this in order to be able to, play in that playing field, and that I then become a supplier on the audited and certified supplier list. And of course, it's the other reasons as well. I mean, you can't necessarily put a value on how much you would get as an uplift once you have a certification mark from TÜV SÜD, but of course it's implied that you can use that as to add to your quality claims, specifically if you are a less known brand. I think that's something that definitely works to their advantage.
Yeah, I can imagine. In a way, also, you guys are probably piggybacking off of the reputation of Germany. As a country and as an engineering country, industrial, high quality, Ordnung muss sein type of country. Are you doing anything with this specifically in Asia? kind of Germaning it up?
Yes, I mean, it's in Asia, what you just said holds 1000% true. Not necessarily the same in other markets, but for sure in Asia. I mean, pretty much every interaction I had was I work for TÜV SÜD, and you either do or you don't know the company. And if it draws a blank, it's a German quality company. Oh, German quality, very good. So it's your classic, and we do work a lot with the German associations, with the trade authorities, etc., in the Asian markets, and that definitely works for us. It's something we play up a lot in all the branding materials that we have, for example, in North Asia, and of course in Singapore and Southeast Asian markets. That works brilliantly for us. But that's a classic example of where content branding-wise would work specifically well in one particular region, but you would then need to dial that down in other regions where that isn't necessarily a USP for your company.
No, in Germany they go like, we have Switzerland.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I understand. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so, from a campaign perspective, is there any particular campaign that you've done that stood out as being particularly successful or interesting? Is there a sort of brand campaign or even a local one that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this ahead of the podcast today. I think what I don't have is a specifically brilliant campaign that stands out above all others, because I don't necessarily think these hero type of campaigns is something that I would even endorse. I'm more about a concerted approach. But what we have done, and I think it's quite interesting, is we've really looked very deeply into the topic of sustainability and how we can best position ourselves in this entire field. And there's a lot of greenwashing happening, whereas we've been around for 150 plus years and have a genuine intent to be a sustainable brand. So we've really considered, we've run quite a number of workshops with our experts, and we've built an entire approach to how we want to market sustainability in conjunction with TÜV SÜD. And that is across the way we look in terms of the new design, the way we speak in terms of brand tonality, then of course in terms of the content pieces. So we've revamped our entire website. We have identified quite a large number of corporate ambassadors to push content pieces on specific topics out through LinkedIn. We've been then running more, let's say, lead generating type campaigns, but we've also been running demand generation campaigns on the topic of sustainability. So it's really almost playing the entire orchestra. And we've taken that as one example of a large case study. And it's something that we are tweaking, refreshing, putting all of the things I mentioned earlier in the conversation into place. For example, next year, we're going out with a podcast on sustainability. And we're going out with a Sustainability Matters talk. So we ran an MVP on one of these talks this year. We identified who attended, how much interaction there was, the content. And we really looked at that as an example. And then we thought, okay, do we need to pivot? Do we need to can it? Is it something that we can scale? So each time we do something, it's part of a larger suite. So I don't think that we should run campaigns that are almost flash in the pan that are fantastic, but then people say, oh my goodness, I remember that. But ultimately, we want something that's more, as a company, sustainable.
Is the sustainability approach a long-term differentiator for your company compared to competitors?
I truly think so. I think that not even just our competitors, if you look at a lot of companies, they have sort of spurts of energy around topic A, and then it's easy to have these great ideas. The tough part is to stay with it and to develop enough content. I don't know about yourself on LinkedIn, but it's about staying with it and making sure that you are continuing to do the good work week after week, month after month. And, until the sort of idea perhaps runs dry, and then you say, okay, we need to refresh and revamp. But what I do see across the board are companies who started something and perhaps have dropped it after a certain number of weeks or months. And some of those are our competitors, some of them aren't. But I think what makes us different is the fact that when we develop something, it has sort of arms and legs, and it also has this global and regional hub spoke backing it as an organization. So there's a lot of work that goes into it between us and the 6 regional commies to say, listen, heads up, we're developing this content on our .com site. So we have 40 plus sites going out with similar type content. So this has to be quite a large orchestrated thing. So it's not that simple to even say we're just going to run a campaign X and that's done, because we're such a large organization. You can imagine moving, it's almost a juggernaut of 200 marketeers into one direction needs proper planning, but enough agility to say we'll do this on a quarterly basis so we can, change things up and adapt and tweak if some things are not going well.
Yeah, I suppose the brand is forever, the message is for next quarter.
Yes.
Right. And I think if you think about the greenwashing, the companies that get called out for this, or that you can identify as doing so, they see it as a campaign, and they don't see it as something that is a part of how they run their business. They don't see it as part of their DNA. And if you believe that sustainability is a long-term differentiator, I suppose it needs to become who your company is rather than what you do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you see other companies that are doing this right?
When it comes to sustainability, in fact, I had the pleasure of studying sustainability and circular economy a couple of years ago, and the case study that we chose was IKEA. And I mean, it's fascinating to see the way IKEA has, changed its entire pitch from, buy something today, and if it's out tomorrow, toss it out, to, we are all about sustainability. Their entire message has changed, their entire marketing campaign has changed. And what they've done is also align the behavior with those messages, so it doesn't become something that's sort of an empty greenwashing attempt. You bring your furniture back, to be recycled. They are pledging and also doing the replanting of trees. Or I think up to 70% of all of their furniture is recycled or built in a sustainable manner. I think that's an amazing example of a company that's really, taken a huge leap from one brand and a message and behavior as a company to something very different. And I think had they've not done that, they might not even exist today.
No, I think this is the key point here, in that there were a lot of very negative stories about IKEA. And of course, they're nominally a Swedish company. They have never paid taxes there, but that's a separate reason. People there are especially considerate of things like this. And like I said, there were a lot of negative stories, and perhaps that got them to genuinely rethink their business model. I mean, it doesn't have to be genuine. It's good that they did it anyway. But I think that the impetus was really, people pointing out that this is not for this age anymore, and that they needed to move with the times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In general, is there any company that you enjoy their marketing a lot, that you would admire or can learn from?
I think two companies that I always take a look at for different reasons. I think BMW, I look at them because they are just so damn sleek. They embody for me that wonderful minimalist German design that I think is wonderful. When you look at the clean lines, the minimalist approach they have to branding, I think their messaging is extremely aligned. They just seem to be very sorted as a brand. And it's a brand that, you want to be identified with. Having spent, a lot of my time also in Germany, it has a very strong, very clearly defined brand identity. And I think that is a company I tend to look towards when I look at sort of engineering prowess, go sexy. And I'm trying to move our company towards the same space, slowly but surely, and they still stay approachable, and they seem to have moved with the times with their branding and yet stay true to themselves. So it's incremental changes, but not sort of a massive leap so that you are disenfranchised with their brand. That's one example. The other example is GE. When it comes to brand content or content as a strategy, I think GE does an amazing job. They have a very clear set of content pieces that are targeting various target audiences. And when it was all about diversity, I felt that they were ahead of the game when they really looked at heroing female engineers, when they looked at, identifying the future generation as a next target audience. They've built quite a lot of content around that. They also do some very interesting CSR work. So I think my tip would be go and look at the GE website, be inspired. It always seems to stay updated. I have no idea how many people they have working on their content, but it must be numerous. And I think as I said, when it comes to design and brand design, BMW's got to be up there.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting companies. GE specifically went through obviously a very massive change over time. They were one of the first to focus on the green part of their jet engines and so on, but they are a kind of how do you call this, like a company that has so many different businesses, conglomerate, and so their entire function, I would guess, as GE corporate is marketing. And so yeah, if you see what they're doing in terms of content and their brand and so on, it's usually very slick. And yeah. BMW, I would say, I own a BMW, but I never see any marketing, although the product is the marketing. But yeah, perhaps that's more prevalent in Germany and other markets.
I think they do. I wouldn't necessarily. I don't see much lead gen marketing they do, but what I like about them is their brand neatness. They seem to, and I know because I also know quite a few people in the marketing organization, they're extremely tight when it comes to governance of how their brand can be used. The image that they portray globally is very neat, it's very tidied up, and it's consistent. And of course, I mean, I live literally down the road from BMW factory, so you see a lot of billboards, BMW billboards, and every time you look at the image, you just think, I want one of those. I don't drive one of those, but I'd say, yeah, I want one. And that's ultimately, they're almost so sleek that they think, they're not going to go and start doing lead gen campaigns. It's like you want one, and that's the image you want to have.
Sure. There's this concept in automotive industry of the halo models, where they bring out a certain model that they don't expect to sell a lot of, but they put out there as a sort of example of what you could get to try to get people to have that feeling that you were just describing. I wonder within your industry if there's a halo service that we could think about, but perhaps that's a question for another time. Thanks a lot, Liz. This was a very interesting conversation. We would love to have you back again at some point, hear more about all of these subjects. For now, again, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. It was so great to be part of this. Thank you for inviting me.
So after most podcasts, we try to have a little conversation about the guest and what we discussed. And today we have Valeria, who's our agency marketing manager. And podcast producer. What did you think about the conversation with Liz?
So I admire Liz and her marketing journey, and also her dedication to all the mentoring activities and supporting women. And it was very insightful to hear about global and local marketing and all the differences between East and West. That is, for example, papers or LinkedIn doesn't work for Asian countries, unlike in Europe, because they're more likely to engage with some video content. So it's obvious that marketers should take into account the diversity of minds and some ideas of the audiences that they're planning a global campaign for.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I think the point that she was making is that some markets are a bit ahead of the curve and some are a bit behind. And I think in this case, Asia is a bit ahead of the curve in terms of so many voices, advertisers, brands, content screaming for attention, and people just not having the bandwidth to deal with long form stuff. With people that have international experience, they'll see what is happening in one market and how that applies to other markets, and I think that's very valuable. Similarly, as an agency, we are, with staff in Hong Kong, in Copenhagen, in Poland, in different places. We see similar benefits for our clients. So not to make this agency promotion thing, but since you're a marketing manager, we can take that route for a second.
And you can also take our LinkedIn, where we're approaching in this way and introducing video materials.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think the markets are moving at different space, and it's interesting at a different pace, and it's interesting to see the differences there, but more in a way that it will inform your future strategy rather than just, this is interesting. the balance that organizations need to have between being very tight and controlling everything, being the brand police versus having some local maneuverability. It's a very difficult one.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to hear how she is trying to add some local flavor to global activities depending on the market.
Yeah, I think that they found a right balance there, but only time will tell. And with all of these things, is a wave movement. It goes from global to local to global again. All right, so I guess the thing that I took from this conversation is that the answer is always, it depends.
Yeah, exactly.
We need to be flexible. This was Memorable Marketing by MediaGroup, the international data-driven marketing agency. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, like and subscribe and share and talk to all your friends about it. Until next time.